The Winnipeg Jets have endured a frustrating loss against the Carolina Hurricanes in a game in which the Jets actually played relatively evenly to a talented but somewhat beleaguered, Carolina Hurricanes team dealing with a number of key injuries. The Jets likewise have a number of key injuries, but honestly, in this one, it was mental errors, some rougher goaltending, and an absentee first line that cost the Jets 2 points. We'll dive into this loss and some major trends that we're seeing with this team overall in tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform of choice, including Apple, Spotify, Google, Megaphone, Odyssey, and YouTube. Doing so is completely free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. But most of all, we just really love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more by visiting FanDuel.com/LockedOn right now to get started. Now, like I said at the top of the episode, I'm going to be diving into Winnipeg versus Carolina, and this game for the Jets felt like one that just sort of got away from Winnipeg. You know, some mediocre goaltending from David Rittich, a couple of really poor defensive reads and turnovers, and a really bad performance from the top line kind of put the Jets behind the eight ball. So let's start off, I guess, with the top line, because that one was probably the one that I think people weren't expecting as much. The combination of 55, 81, and 62 just did not get it done whatsoever. Scheifele, to me, looked very slow in this game, which I know he's not the fastest skater, but like even by his standards, something didn't seem right in this game. I don't know if he's dealing with some kind of an injury or if he just had an off night, but even by his standards, his passes weren't great. His shot selection was mediocre. It felt like he could not find the puck. And I know that at some level it was partly due to the ice, right? It seemed like the ice in Raleigh was not so good this evening, but by the same token, I mean, the Canes kind of negotiated it, maybe because they're used to it, but it's not like the Jets have never played on crappy ice before. So I don't know what was up with Scheifele. Sometimes he just has games where maybe he's not, 100% with it, which you're allowed to have off games. But I think with how the Jets are constructed, it's a lot more noticeable if Scheifele and the top players have a not-so-great night. Speaking of guys not having a not-so-great night, Kyle Connor, man, what on earth happened to him in this game? This was one of his worst performances in recent memory, which, quite honestly, for the past several weeks, he's not really been very impactful to begin with. So, yeah, KFC, he's just, I don't know. I felt like earlier in the season he was using his line mates better. It felt like he was more involved and engaged with the build-up. Recently, it feels like he's kind of playing with a lot of tunnel vision. I don't know what has changed with him, but he's cheating for offense more. He's getting caught out of position. His lack of defensive work is becoming increasingly noticeable. He's just not really doing anywhere near enough on the ice for what you'd really ask of him. And, like, no one's asking him to be Mikko Koivu or something in defense, right? But, like, at a bare minimum, you want him to track back. You want him to not fly the zone before his defender has made the outlet pass to him. You want to make sure that when he's moving up the ice and transitioning zones, that he's doing so effectively and not causing turnovers as part of him jumping the gun ahead of the pass. So, yeah, for KFC, just a really ineffective game. Didn't really score anything. Wasn't often in dangerous shooting areas. And that's like 90% of his game. So if he's not actually scoring, if he's not getting into those dangerous opportunities, I don't really know what else he's going to do, because the rest of his game is kind of predicated all around that. And for me, like, of that line, I guess Nino Niederreiter probably had the best performance of all of those three. He threw a couple of big checks, had a couple of decent shots. But then, at some point, that whole line got benched. It was around the halfway point of the second period. Bones had kind of decided he'd had enough. Fair enough, right? I don't disagree with that. But then Bones kind of did the usual thing where he slides Mason Appleton up to the first line and he puts Nino Niederreiter on the third line. Now, for Nino, that ended up actually working out. Thanks to a great pass from Morgan Barron, Barron feeds a great cross slot pass between two defenders. Nino just sort of pots it behind the goaltender, and the Jets ended up very narrowly coming close to tying it. 4-3, not the worst deficit during that point of the game. But, for the Jets, I just feel like this concept of keeping Scheifele and Connor together and then adding like a middle six grinder doesn't really fit. Like if you're going to promote somebody from the bottom six, it's got to be like Barron or Gustafsson, not a guy who is likely to be, one of those players who I feel really hasn't been all that noticeable recently. Appleton's not been bad necessarily, but in terms of a difference maker, probably not the one that I'm looking at. But overall, this whole line struggles were kind of a problem for the Jets because we all know that Winnipeg is built to score early and sort of defend throughout the rest of the game. And if your top line is basically not doing anything for half the game, well, you're kind of in trouble. And they didn't end up playing until like the third period or so, and it wasn't even until a couple of shifts in where we actually saw Scheifele and some of the other guys get off the bench. So Bones was clearly pissed. I would say a right benching, although I would not have done so with Nino. And after the game, what was kind of interesting was that, the media asked for Scheifele and Connor to come out and give some comments, and the only person who did and actually responded was Nino, who said, we didn't deserve to play. We were very poor, and ultimately, he was the one who was accountable and took responsibility. So, interesting look there for the organization and for the team, certainly for some of the veteran players who really should be doing better, but I mean, it is what it is. Every once in a while, you're going to have a crap game, but for some of these guys, it's been an ongoing problem lately. So Winnipeg really needs this top six and some of these star players to step up because without them, Hellebuyck and Rittich are going to be on an island, and it is what it is, right? Now, I'm kind of harping on the top line, but they weren't the only guys who had some issues tonight. We'll dive into some of the other issues with the defense and also spotlight some performances that were really quite good and certainly worth shouting about in a game in which, maybe there wasn't as much to be super excited about. Before we go any further, though, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. New customers get a no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet does not win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. You can bet on everything from the money line to point scores to the number of threes drained. Maybe you are tracking LeBron James's historic season. Where do you think he'll finish his current milestone scoring record at the end of this year? You can cast a bet on that. You can cast a bet on who you think is going to be the next champion this year. Maybe it's the Celtics. Maybe it's the Bucks, although I think Giannis might still be out. I don't follow basketball as closely, I'll be 100% honest, but I know enough to at least to identify a few players and stuff. No matter what you're into, though, FanDuel lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. Don't miss this chance to get your no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. That is FanDuel.com/LockedOn to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We are, of course, diving into Winnipeg versus Carolina, and, for a 5-3 loss, I kind of said 4-3, but it was 5-3 with the empty netter. I mean, it was a game in which it sort of felt like the Jets just kind of shot themselves in the foot, right? I know that they're dealing with some critical injuries. Morrissey, Dubois, obviously just to name a few. Perfetti, also a really important loss. But all of that said, it wasn't like the Canes were without injuries. And honestly, Carolina didn't play like amazingly. It sort of felt like a couple of really big mistakes from the Jets kind of cost them. I think Rittich will certainly feel unhappy with his performance. I would say he had 2 to 3 goals where, if it was Hellebuyck might have saved those opportunities. I'm not going to like harsh on Rittich for doing his job the best that he can. I think we all knew coming into the season what sort of goalie he was going to be. If you kind of think of him as like a league minimum Pavlik, that's kind of what you're getting with Rittich. I mean, he's fine. He's got a good vibe. Seems like a super nice guy. He tries really hard, but you just notice that the post tracking, the puck tracking, and the reactions and reads are always a step behind. Unfortunately, some games he has really good outings, but most games you're looking at average or below average from him. And this was one of those games that was kind of more on the below average side. Now, I will say it wasn't all on him. The Jets' defense today and the puck management was at times atrocious. I'm kind of looking especially at the Dylan Pionk pairing, which was just, yeah, what a complete nightmare. Dylan with Pionk is just a very different player than Dylan with literally anyone else, and that tends to be the case with anyone who gets paired with Pionk. You can have a perfectly normal, healthy defender who suddenly gets assigned to Neil's partnership, and it just doesn't really work. Dylan had a turnover early in the game where he was trying to pass to Kyle. Of course, Connor had already fled the zone. It gets turned over and turns into a goal against. And, it's just one of those things where you kind of look at this team and you're like, why aren't people on the same page here? So, yeah, not an impressive start, not something that I think the Jets will be particularly pleased with. But I guess it's not something that we're, necessarily unfamiliar with. As far as Pionk is concerned, I think what people will tend to remember is the Stenlund pass that sort of deflected off of the ice and skipped over Pionk's stick. It didn't really seem like he was in a good position to receive the puck to begin with. Stenlund kind of fired a pass that was a little bit too hard for him to handle. Even then, though, on top of a really bad evening where Pionk just seemingly was oblivious on too many reads or made poor passes, didn't win the battles that you hoped he would, it just sort of capped off a performance in which you really need to ask yourself, should he even be playing right now? I mean, this has been among Pionk's worst performances for the Jets, and it's not like it's an isolated trend. For the past couple of months, we've seen that Neil has just sort of kind of nosedived, and it's tough to watch. I mean, he's really struggling. It seems like he's constantly behind the play defensively, and it is costing the Jets a number of key goal scoring opportunities and stuff. I mean, in this one, that missed pass immediately got picked off and turned into, I think it was like what, a Drury goal, which ended up being in this one the game winner. So really frustrating. Just felt like an evening in which stuff like that from the defense and the top line really killed the Jets. But if you're looking for positive takeaways, the second line with Ehlers and Wheeler and Namestnikov was brilliant. I know that Wheeler wasn't always in the best positions. Sometimes you can see that slowness and clunkiness with the puck handling catching up to him a bit, but otherwise, Namestnikov and Ehlers were flying. They have very good chemistry together, so I think they should probably remain a duo. Wheeler, it is what it is. I don't think he's going to get benched anytime soon, so unless somebody supplants him in the top six, you're just going to have to get used to him being up there. I'm not going to say anything more about it. I mean, we've talked about him certainly needing to be more in a third line role. I think that would really suit where he is and honestly help the Jets with matchups, but it is what it is. I'm not going to waste my breath any more than I already have on it. So, yeah, all of that said, for this line's performance, great outing. I would also say I was really impressed with Morgan Barron. The third line otherwise didn't really do a lot, but Barron was very noticeable, had a great assist on the goal. I'm telling you, man, Barron and Gustafsson are two players that I think if you pair them with skill, you'll see that there are some notable ceilings there. I think Barron could legitimately be like the Andrew Kopp replacement that the Jets have kind of been looking for. I don't think Appleton has ever really materialized in that way, but Barron certainly looks like he's got skill. He has vision and passing. He's got a pretty decent shot. It just hasn't, unfortunately, panned out for him enough to where he's finishing on the chances that you would really like him to. But at some point, I do think the dam will break. It's just the guy is too good for the role that he's been given for me to expect him to stay down forever. So really happy to see his development continuing. He's looked a lot more comfortable this year. And yeah, good to see. Sandberg, I thought, had an all right enough game. Had a couple of moments where he got danced around by Sebastian Aho, but That's kind of to be expected. He and DeMello, when they're together, are usually pretty solid. This game, I think it was a little bit tougher in part because they also got tasked with some of Scheifele's shifts, and that just didn't go well, let's be honest, because the Scheifele line got pulverized. But otherwise, I mean, the Capobianco-Schmidt pairing I thought was fine. Capobianco, he does have some defensive warts, but would I still prefer him to like Pionk or Stanley? Maybe. I think he does a good enough job. I think he's been about what I would expect for a seventh defender, but sometimes he has some nice offensive upside. So props to him for having a really solid outing. Otherwise, I mean, it's just kind of same old, same old. The problems with this team tend to be pretty routine and, not nothing to really, I guess, get upset about now. The Jets are kind of clinging on to that second wild card spot and are hoping that the Flames are going to drop some results here pretty soon. But until then, the Jets just kind of have to hope and pray that, this run of form is enough for them to get through. Right now, the Flames are tied with the Yotes 2-2, so let's hope that score line ends up in favor of Arizona. Arizona's actually been winning games recently, so maybe that'll help, especially with the Preds having just beat the Red Wings. So, yeah, this was not a fun time to lose, but it is what it is. Jets are just going to have to pull themselves together like they usually do. Now, in just a moment, we're going to preview a little bit of the upcoming game against the Boston Bruins and maybe talk about some potential returnees for players who haven't exactly been with the team recently. But before we go any further, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at Built. For those of you looking for a protein bar alternative that's actually tasty, Built Bar is exactly what you've been looking for. They are the only protein bar that tastes more like a candy bar with a 100% real chocolate exterior and a soft, chewy interior. They come in fabulous flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, coconut almond, and one of my personal favorites, one of their old throwbacks, raspberry dark chocolate. Very simple, very straightforward, not fussy, but they do it super well. And as great as it tastes, it's even better for you, with most Built Bars clocking in at around 130 calories, 4 grams of net carbs, and around 17 grams of protein. So, like me, if you're looking for something that's guilt-free for maybe a pre-workout supplement, something that's like a breakfast meal replacement, or just an afternoon snack that doesn't make you feel guilty, Built Bars are there for you. You can pick up some preset variety boxes with very popular flavors at Sam's Club and Walmart, or also head on over to Built.com to customize your own personal variety box and find your favorite Built Bar. Hello, friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets. We are just wrapping up really quickly talking about some stuff ahead of Winnipeg's game against the Boston Bruins this Thursday. Obviously, the game against the Canes didn't go super well. It is what it is, right? I mean, you just kind of have to shake your head and say, on to the next one. I mean, I did expect at least one of these games to be a definite defeat, but I guess if the Jets are looking for some kind of a positive spin, they had the two weekend games that they swept, and the Bruins just got smushed by the Blackhawks 6-3. So maybe there's a chance for the Jets to be a little bit excited. I think the biggest thing for Winnipeg, though, is they're going to be hoping that Dubois and Morrissey are back. I'm going to be honest, I think Morrissey probably misses this game. I just think Josh is one of those players who, even though he is kind of getting closer, you just can't really risk it. He's like one of the 3 players that this team cannot really function without. Hellebuyck being one of the others, Ehlers probably being the third, especially right now with just how thin the forward ranks are. But Morrissey on the back end, definitely a player that the Jets just really don't want to live without. So hopefully he's back and healthy, but I guess the biggest and most likely returnee is going to be Dubois, which will be interesting to see who he benches because Dubois, obviously, he will probably anchor that second line. I kind of wouldn't mind seeing him on the third line with like Wheeler or Gagne or something. I think Dubois hasn't exactly been outstanding recently, and with Namestnikov really clicking along with Ehlers, if you had like a third line that's not actually a third line in ice time, but more of like just a third line in terms of different matchup combos that you can throw out there, I would look to put him with Connor and Wheeler or something. I think if you get Connor and Dubois back together, I think you'll solve a lot of what has been going wrong with Kyle, and you'll also get Dubois going as well. The right wing can probably be just about anyone, and I think as long as it's not like Menelainen or something, it'll be fine. But like the first line, you could maybe do Ehlers, Scheifele, and Namestnikov, or I guess Nina Ryder if you want. I mean, there's like tons of combos that you can try, but the main thing is just to make sure that you keep Ehlers and Namestnikov together. I think those two have good chemistry. I would look to try and figure out a way to get Scheifele going as well. He's not really looked himself too much as of late, and Connor definitely needs that boost. So hopefully Dubois comes back. I think that would really help Winnipeg's forward depth, especially on the scoring side. I mean, PLD is definitely one of the most important catalysts on this team, and certainly one of their better finishers. So if he can come back against the Bruins, that'd be great. I think Boston's a big physical team with a lot of skill and a lot of veteran experience. So this is kind of the exact game that I think Dubois would thrive in, although hopefully he does avoid penalties because that Bruins power play is super lethal and will piece the Jets apart if they are not careful. I would expect Hellebuyck to get the net back, of course, and it'll be against Linus Ullmark, who may very well win the Vezina Trophy this year. I feel like, who was it? Sorokin from the Islanders, for me, would probably be the player that I would look to as the number one Vezina pick. Hellebuyck may be right behind him, and Ullmark in third, although that's more on the conditions of the team that they're playing for and not just a reflection of their own performance. If it was by performance alone, Ullmark probably has the edge over everyone, but he's also on a team where he's kind of expected to be really good. So, yeah, really good crop of Vezina candidates this year. Let's hope ours is the one who prevails. Drop your score predictions for this Thursday in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets on Twitter. For tonight's episode, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen today. Make your second listen game-to-game NHL. It features every moment, every top performance, and every result, and you can follow Locked On Game-to-Game from Odyssey, YouTube, of course, all of your favorite podcasting platforms. They give you all of the expert local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. So be sure to like, follow, and subscribe. And as always, thank you so much for listening. Have a great night, and go Jets go.